Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's a pretty rigorous legal exploration. We're looking into the, frankly, bizarre, high stakes world of Fletcher's Ice Island T3. And the question, really, at the core of our analysis is fundamental. Do the standards for criminal negligence, the line between an accident and a crime, do they actually change when you're totally isolated? Like
Yeah.
on a drifting ice floe, hundreds of miles from any police, dealing with drunk people swinging butcher cleavers. Okay, let's unpack this. The strange, dramatic, and legally critical world of United States v. Escamilla. It's a case where the details, like a faulty rifle and some homemade raisin wine, really did redefine involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah, this case is absolutely vital. It gives you, the listener, two really indispensable rules for analyzing involuntary manslaughter, especially when you hit a complex fact pattern. We're not just, looking at the story. We're trying to build a diagnostic framework. So our path today is sort of twofold. First, we really need to pin down the definition of gross negligence because the court found it requires a specific element knowledge. That's key. And second, we have to analyze the critical role of what the court called special circumstances when you're measuring someone's conduct.
Okay, let's start there then. That first doctrinal pillar. What is the core legal standard for involuntary manslaughter? Specifically thinking about the level of negligence needed. It's definitely not just like regular carelessness, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. No.
Right.
Involuntary manslaughter, it demands really exacting proof of gross negligence. The law defines that as a wanton or reckless disregard for human life. Simple negligence, well, that might get you sued in civil court, sure, but it won't land you in jail for manslaughter. Big difference.
Right. So, like, if someone's driving incredibly recklessly, maybe 100 miles an hour down a quiet street, that sounds like it's probably gross negligence.
Exactly. That's a good example. But here's where it gets tricky, where the real nuance comes in. This comes from an established rule from United States v. Cardi, which this Escamilla case strongly reinforces. The really crucial addition is this knowledge sub-rule. Okay?
Yeah.
The prosecution has to show the accused had actual knowledge that their conduct was a threat to others' lives, or, alternatively, knowledge of circumstances that made the danger foreseeable. Without that specific awareness, that mens rea about the danger, the law basically treats the death as, a tragedy and accident, but not a crime.
Okay, I want to test that knowledge requirement right away. Let's use the setting here, the Arctic. It's just so bizarre. The case happens on Fletcher's Ice Island T3. It's a research station, like 99% ice, floating in the Arctic Ocean. Civilians, under government contract, and the facts, they paint this picture of a volatile, almost anarchic place. No hospital, no doctor, certainly no police. And we know before this incident, there were serious drinking problems. One guy, nicknamed Porky, tells you something, right? He'd apparently attacked people multiple times, like 3 times, with butcher cleavers trying to get booze. So given that background, a volatile, isolated place, men threatening each other with cleavers, if Escamilla brings a loaded rifle into that situation, isn't that automatically gross negligence? Just by escalating things, why does this knowledge rule even matter here?
Well, that's exactly the confusion the trial court kind of fell into, and is where the appellate court really focused its correction. Look, bringing a loaded gun into a tense situation, yeah, that's certainly negligent, maybe even very negligent. But the appellate court says we have to look at the specific danger that actually caused the death. And the question is, was that specific danger foreseeable to Escamilla? That's where the facts about the weapon itself, the specific rifle, become absolutely critical.
Okay. Let's analyze United States v. Escamilla then, using that lens, the weapon defect, and this knowledge requirement. First, what are the legally dispositive facts?
Right. So the defendant, Escamilla, he was called back to the main camp. Why? Because Porky was drunk and apparently stealing wine. So Escamilla goes and gets a rifle from the common storage area, loads it presumably for protection given the history with Porky. He then finds the victim, Benny Lightsey, who was the station manager, and Porky drinking this pretty dangerous mix of 190 proof ethyl alcohol cut with homemade raisin wine. Later, Escamilla argues with Lightsey about the wine. He waves the rifle back and forth, and then bang, the gun goes off, killing Lightsey. Now, the crucial evidence which wasn't disputed was that this particular rifle was highly defective. It could fire without pulling the trigger. Like if you dropped it, banged it, even just put slight pressure on the bolt handle. Right. The court actually called it defective in a most deadly way.
Wow. Okay. And what was the core legal issue then, specifically about how the jury was instructed?
The issue was pretty narrow, but hugely important. Did the trial court make a mistake by not telling the jury they had to find? Escamilla had actual knowledge that pointing that specific defective gun was an immediate threat to human life. Was that knowledge necessary to convict him of criminal involuntary manslaughter?
So what rule did the appellate court use to sort this out?
They went straight back to the party rule we mentioned. Gross negligence requires concrete proof. Proof that the defendant knew about the specific tendency to danger or that the injury was, in fact, highly foreseeable to them. That awareness, that knowledge of the specific risk is just an indispensable ingredient of criminal negligence, distinguishing it from, simple civil carelessness.
Okay, so what was the court's analysis then regarding this defective rifle? Wait a second. Does that mean if Escamilla honestly thought the rifle was working fine, maybe he was just being really careless, waving it around, he gets off the hook for criminal negligence? Because the actual danger came from a hidden mechanical defect he didn't know about.
That is precisely the court's logic. Yes. It sounds counterintuitive, maybe, but it goes to the mens rea, the criminal intent. See, the trial judge's instructions basically just said, well, pointing any loaded gun might be gross negligence. Kind of a general statement. But the appellate court said, hold on, the jury needs to separate general negligence, which, let's face it, people commit all the time, from criminal negligence. So if the jury believed Escamilla was genuinely unaware that this specific rifle could go off accidentally, if he didn't know that defect existed, then the specific danger that caused Lightsey's death wasn't actually foreseeable to him. His conduct, however, stupid or careless it might seem, lacked that required criminal intent regarding the actual fatal risk. And the conclusion from the appellate court. The conviction was reversed and remanded for a new trial, because leaving out that crucial instruction about knowledge was reversible error. The trial court had, in effect, lowered the bar from criminal gross negligence down to something closer to simple carelessness.
Okay, let's use that garden hose hypothetical you mentioned earlier to really cement this knowledge rule. It's pretty visceral. So if I point what looks like a totally normal garden hose at someone, just messing around, but unknown to me, there's some weird manufacturing defect and it explodes and hurts them. My lack of knowledge about that defect means it's not criminal gross negligence on my part.
Right, exactly. It's an accident, maybe civilly liable, but not criminal.
But if I knew that hose was leaking, say, boiling oil, and I pointed it anyway.
Well, then that's clearly gross negligence. You knew the specific danger. It's the knowledge, the awareness of that specific risk that makes it criminal.
That's a perfect illustration. The context, or rather the knowledge of the context, determines foreseeability.
Exactly. And that brings us very neatly to the second equally crucial error the court found in the Escamilla trial. It raises this really important question that goes beyond just the gun's mechanics. When you're deciding if conduct is grossly negligent, does the jury have to consider the immediate environment? Does the standard of, civilized conduct actually shift depending on where you are?
It sounds like it could be an invitation to anarchy, doesn't it? Escamilla's defense actually argued this. They said the jury had to measure his conduct against all the circumstances, including the station's location, the total lack of law enforcement, no medical help, not even locks on the doors on T3. Did the court seriously buy the argument that criminal standards change just because they were on a temporary floating piece of ice?
Well, buy it might be strong, but they certainly recognize that you can't just ignore reality. The general rule, and this is pretty standard, holds that gross negligence is always determined by all of the facts and circumstances surrounding an act. So while, yes, the law of the United States applies everywhere, the application of those standards has to allow for consideration of extreme surrounding factors. The court found that refusing to instruct the jury on this was an error.
Interesting. So what was the court's analysis specifically regarding this unique, maybe anarchic T3 environment?
The court basically accepted the core of the defense argument on this point. They said, look, what might be grossly negligent conduct in, say, downtown Washington, D.C. or the Eastern District of Virginia might not meet that high standard on T3. Why? Because T3 was incredibly inaccessible. No police, no doctors. People were even told not to lock doors because of potential emergencies like the structure collapsing. And all these factors together meant that really, apart from self-restraint, there were zero recognized means of law enforcement available.
Yeah.
It created a situation of de facto self-governance, or at least self-protection.
So in that specific context, arming yourself when you know there's a violent drunk on the loose maybe wasn't automatically a wanton or reckless disregard for life. It could potentially be seen as a necessary measure of self-enforcement, because there was literally no one else to call.
That's precisely the implication. The jury needed the chance to consider if Escamilla's actions, getting a gun in that highly isolated place, threatened by guys with cleavers, was truly grossly negligent, given that each person basically had to rely on themselves for immediate protection. Measuring his actions against what someone in a safe, policed suburban neighborhood would do was seen as fundamentally unfair by the appellate court. The context mattered.
And the conclusion on this special circumstances issue.
Also reversible error. The trial court shouldn't have restricted the jury's consideration of these unique circumstances. The standard of conduct, the court affirmed, is fundamentally contextual. Those unique, isolated, frankly dangerous conditions on T3 had to be factored into the finding of gross negligence. Okay, so if we tie all this together, looking at the bigger picture, this case really gives us a solid step-by-step diagnostic checklist. It's really useful for assessing involuntary manslaughter, especially when you're faced with, unusual or extreme facts like these. This is your actionable framework for exams or analysis. First step, issue spotting. Identify the specific conduct that caused the death. Crucially, was it unpurposed? Meaning, was it fundamentally an accident, not intentional killing? Second, negligence standard. Okay, it was an accident, but what level of negligence are we talking? Is it just simple negligence, or does it rise to the level of gross negligence? Remember, it must be gross negligence, that wanton or reckless disregard for life, for it to be criminal manslaughter. Third, and this is absolutely key from Part D and reinforced here, the knowledge check. Did the accused have actual knowledge of the specific threat to life? Or did they know about circumstances that made the injury highly foreseeable to them? If they lacked that awareness of the specific danger, like Escamilla potentially lacking knowledge of the gun defect, then the criminal intent element fails. Fourth, you layer on the context check. This is the big contribution from Escamilla. Were there any special circumstances? Things like extreme isolation, lack of police or medical facilities, unique dangers. The jury must consider these when measuring the defendant's conduct. Conduct isn't judged in a vacuum, it's measured against the total reality of the situation. And only if you've checked all those boxes, unpurposed killing, gross negligence, required knowledge, and considered the special circumstances, only then can you move to the final step. Causation and conclusion, potentially finding involuntary manslaughter.
That's a really fascinating breakdown. It shows how even bedrock criminal standards like negligence have to be somewhat relative to context,
Right.
and how, yeah, a faulty rifle, some homemade raisin wine, and the threat of cleavers on a melting island can literally force the law to adapt. It's quite something.
Absolutely. I think the key takeaway here is that awareness, the defendant's actual knowledge and context, the special circumstances, they are just everything when you're judging negligence in the criminal sphere. It's what separates, an honest, albeit maybe tragic mistake from a criminal act driven by conscious disregard for life.
Okay, here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Fletcher's Ice Island T3. It was often described legally as just unclaimed ice, kind of a no man's land. Now, what if T3 had been formally declared sovereign U.S. territory, maybe classified as a remote military base or something more official? Do you think that defense argument about self-enforcement due to lack of police would have carried the same weight with the appellate court then? Does making it formally U.S. territory change the practical reality of being hundreds of miles from any real help? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. easy answers.